What's going on, people? It's Hypnofist here. Just doing another quick video. Now, the purpose of this video today is it's a topic that I feel will be very relevant to this channel, being that I'm going to be doing lots of predictions and analysis on upcoming fights. Um, the purpose of this video today is to talk about different levels in boxing. When I am doing my film study on fighters, I observe and I try to spot the little nuances and little tricks and traits of fighters, um, and based on what I see in terms of skill sets and the quality of opponents they're facing, I usually group fighters into a particular level or category that I believe they are at as a prize fighter. Now, I personally have 13 different levels that I can put any particular fighter in, that I will throw them in terms of the category where they are as a professional prize fighter. um, and this is based solely what I see from them in terms of the skill sets that they display in the ring and the level of opposition they're facing, and how well they're able to execute. Now these levels are tomato can, club fighter, novice, prospect, journeyman, gatekeeper, a faded or aging fighter, a contender, a low level champion, a title holder, a world class opponent, an elite fighter, and a boxing prodigy. I'll try to do a quick breakdown on each so you can hopefully sort of understand my perspective, and why I sort of try to group these guys in to whichever category I feel that they're at. Um, Now the first level is a tomato can. This level is it's pretty self-explanatory and doesn't really need to be expanded on too much. A tomato can is usually a fighter who's not only a terrible boxer, they're also poor athletes, and they have no type of punch resistance. These types of opponents have garbage records with huge KO losses in their in their losses columns, hardly any wins, and there's just simply boxing just to make supplement income or something like that, additional income. Um, they're usually matched up with fighters specifically to get knocked out. I like to think of them as lambs being led to the slaughter, if that makes sense. The next level up from that is a club fighter. Now, a club fighter are very similar to tomato cans, but usually they have a better level of punch resistance. They have somewhat small ability of, to box. They have a very tiny bit of boxing ability, but they don't have any ring IQ. And one thing about club fighters is if they're pretty evenly matched, um, you can they make for entertaining boxing if they're matched evenly with another club fighter, because you tend to end up having rock'em sock'em type matches because there's no boxing ability, because they can't box, they have no IQ in the ring. You get great entertainment in terms of two guys throwing punches or going at it. Again, these types of opponents are usually fed to fighters, and just for the purpose of padding out and filling out records. Next one up from this level is novices. Now, novice boxers is a bit of a tricky category because you can sort of have one or two different types of fighters that get lumped in there. Now, at the first sort of stage, well, not the stage, but the first group of people you could potentially lump into the novice category is, amateur prospects who crossed over into the pro ranks. So these are guys you may have highly extensive amateur backgrounds, but these guys are only lumped into this category simply because they have no professional fight experience. So because they have no experience in the pro ranks, you'd have to call them novice boxers. Um, they usually move out of the category very quickly once they've had 5 or 6 fights. Um, once they fill out their resume a little bit and get some rounds in under their belt, then they usually move up to the next category. Novice boxers can also have fighters that have a basic level of skill, but usually very poor in certain physical areas, and they're quite poor when you're talking about the different facets of their fight game. Next level up from that is the prospect. Prospect again is pretty self-explanatory. Prospects are usually highly touted amateur prospects who have had extensive amateur pedigree. They may have gone to the Olympic Games, they may have won, the World Games, the Pan Ams. It depends, where they are. The ABAs, European Championships. It just depends. But these are guys who come from the pro game, and they've come from the amateur game. Sorry, not the pro game. They come from the amateur game and now taking up the pro ranks. And prospects are usually fighters that are deemed to be capable of excelling and moving their way right up to the sort of top level of the sport, by both fans, media people, stakeholders such as the networks and promoters, and they're expected to move into the upper echelons of the sport. Although these amateurs fall into these categories, you can also have prize fighters who have turned pro early, and they've started to make some noise in the sport and put on a string of semi-impressive wins against decent level opposition, but again still early in their professional career. Not all top level boxers come from the amateurs. Some guys don't have hardly any amateur fights, and they go on to do well in the pro ranks. So you can't really just lump the prospects and say that they're all top amateurs. But yeah, that's another group that could come into the prospect stage. Now the thing is with prospects must be very carefully matched up. You can't overmatch them. Prospects have to be developed very carefully. One, because they have their pro career to think about. So promoters try to match them up with relatively easy opponents. But at the same time, it's also important for careful. It has to be careful matchmaking, because you have to match prospects up in order to allow them to develop and learn. But at the same time, you can't throw them to the wolves and let them fight, someone who's way out of their league, because it will, kill their momentum as a professional prize fighter, and it will also, it could end their career early. Perfect example of that was a professional fighter who went by the name of David Reed. Now, David Reed was a 1996 US, I think it was a US amateur. He was on the Olympics team. I don't know if he won a medal, but he turned pro after the games, and he ended up fighting Trinidad very young in his career. Tito Trinidad, I'm talking about. Tito Trinidad at that time, he was one of the top guys in the sport. He was, at the welterweight division, I believe they met, and Tito was an absolute monster at welterweight, and he was fed David Reed, and David Reed got absolutely destroyed, and he never came back from that. His career was pretty much over after that fight. So it's very important to ensure that prospects are matched up correctly. Otherwise, you'll kill their career before it really starts to take off. Okay. Next level up is the journeyman. Now, journeyman is a career fighter, and usually they don't achieve any significant success, at the world level. When we're talking, the top upper echelon of the sport, they usually don't, they don't make no mark, or they don't have no success at the world level. Journeymen are usually fighters who have a decent level of skill, some athletic ability, but they just don't have the capability of pushing themselves right to the top, to the top level of the sport. Where journeymen are valuable is they're quite tough, and they've got good punch resistance. So these types of fighters are usually used by the upper level fighters for stay busy type fights. If they want to get some rounds in. They're also used by top level operators if a world-class fighter, or title holder or whatever has lost his fight, he's lost the fight, and they use journeymen to sort of rebuild their confidence, and get some rounds in. So if they've, let's say for example, they've lost the fight, they may have take a couple of tune-up fights against one or two journeymen just to get their confidence back and get back in the groove of things. And journeymen are also used by prospects to test them as well, and allow them to to be put under a reasonable amount of manageable pressure, without getting it helps them get rounds in, and they're not fighting an opponent that's just simply a pushover. Now the next level up is the gatekeeper. A division gatekeeper is usually a fighter who has a very good mix of skill, athleticism, ring IQ, and punch resistance. Usually gatekeepers, they're known to be the measuring stick for a division, and for prospects, they're usually used and they're matched up against a prospect, for example. But depending on how a prospect is able to deal with a gatekeeper, you can usually tell how far the prospect's potential is in terms of how far up to the top they can reach. And gatekeepers are also used by the top level operators, the world class and the elite fighters, to stay busy. So for stay busy fights, if they haven't got no fights lined up at the world title shots, or mandatory defenses, and they may use a gatekeeper for a title defense, a voluntary defense, or something like that. Whilst they're usually durable, they gatekeepers tend to struggle with the skill sets and the power of the world class or the elite level operators. So yeah, that's the gatekeeper. Very, very gatekeepers are usually they're very valuable in boxing, because of what they potentially demonstrate. And the next level up is now we're sort of moving into the sort of top level of the spectrum when we're talking about levels in boxing. The next level up is the fading or the aging fighter. Now, this category is usually fighters who have one point with top tier fighters. It could even be former pound for pound guys. These are guys who operate at a very long time at the top level, but due to the physical decline, the body, your boxing is a young man's game. So due to the fact that they decline, they drop in terms of levels. But aging fighters, one thing about aging fighters, they're very, very experienced in the professional ranks. Because they've consistently beaten top level guys back to back, or they've competed and contested against top level operators. They're usually very crafty and very experienced. Now these guys are usually used by fighters to maintain, a fighter's brand value or as a fighter, or because these fading or aging fighter, they always have name value. It's always they can always say, oh, this person beat so and so, even if this guy was relevant 6 or 7 years ago. So they're used mostly for brand value, and even to build up contenders. So a contender, a guy coming up on the ranks, they may fight an experienced aging fighter, and use that to build up their own brand value. So usually they're used by prospects to establish themselves on the scene. Now, one thing you notice is that depending on how faded a fighter is, what I mean to say is, depending on how long they reigned at the top of their division, or top of the world rankings as a fighter, pound for pound, whatever. Depending on how long they reigned, you usually find that they're more durable. So if you've got someone who's a former pound for pound, number one, for example, and 6 or 7 years later down the line he's still fighting, they're usually extremely very durable, very, very durable, because they're very crafty and very skilled. It's just that the body is failing them. The reflexes go, the speed goes, the ability to anticipate, punch resistance may go a bit as well. The longer they last as a faded fighter in that category. Next level up from that is the contender. Now, the contender is someone who obviously worked their way up the rankings. They're someone who have somewhat established themselves as a legitimate fighter, and these are guys who are a legitimate threat to the upper echelons of the division. Contenders will usually be able to move up the ranks, but they just don't have the capability of taking it to the next level needed to win that world title. They're usually excellent athletes and boxers as well. They have very good IQ, but they just lack that ability to put everything together, and they can't really execute or adapt in the ring. One thing about contenders is they don't really adapt in the ring too well. They have their fight plan, and once they're put under pressure and they can't seem to overcome what they're facing in the ring, then they just don't adapt. So yeah, the contender is someone who's good but not good enough. Next level up is a low level champion. Now, a low level champion, usually these are guys who are capable of winning a world title. There is for most low level champions, it's winning a title for them is fighting or being matched against the right opponent. But the problem they have is they usually lose it within the first couple of title defenses. They can't hold on to their titles for long. And one other thing about low level champions is that when they're competing in a division that's there's a lot of talent and a lot of elite fighters or top level operators, low level champions usually get relegated to contender status, or they really usually get relegated to contender or even a gatekeeper. It's just because they're not capable of seriously competing and contending for titles against other guys in the division that are top level guys. So they usually can't adapt. They can't adjust mid fight as well. These are another group of guys that can't adjust mid well. They got a good style and they can impose themselves on the lower level guys, the journeymans and the gatekeepers, but they can't adapt when they're dealing with a world class fighter. He's got many tricks in his bag and can pull out one trick here, and adapt in the ring. Next level up from that is the title holder. Now, title holders are usually fighters that can reign in the division. They can make several defenses of their titles, but they usually reign when they're competing in a top level division. Sorry, that don't make no sense. What I mean to say is a title holder usually can reign within a weak division and make several defenses of their titles. Title holders have excellent all-round capabilities, but they just usually lack the ability to make changes mid-fight and elevate their game. One thing about title holders, usually have one particular attribute that makes them stand out and compete at that level, but also at the same time they usually have one flaw in their fight game that stops them from being considered a world class or even an elite fighter. So title holders, they usually they can't break it into the world class stage. Now the next level up is the world class fighter. World class fighter is usually a fighter. They have exceptional abilities to compete, against the other top level guys in the sport. They're very well rounded. They have, excellent fundamentals, and they can adapt quite good against opponents mid fight. They can usually compete out, one or two world class weight classes above their natural weight. These usually because their skill sets allow them to sort of nullify, the bigger guys and the power that they have to sort of face in the top divisions, top higher level divisions, like what the bigger weight classes. And usually world class fighters usually have one standard attribute, whether it's their style or their physical attribute that makes them able to compete consistently at that top level. The next level up from that is the elite fighter. Now, the elite fighter, this is someone who's exceptional in all areas. There's no real weakness in their fight game. They're supremely fundamentally sound. They have excellent athletic ability. They can adapt extremely well and very quickly mid-fight. And these are guys who you can't define them by one particular style. You find that elite fighters, you can't define them as oh yeah, they're brawlers, or they're punchers, or they're counter punchers, sharpshooters. They're multi-tasked, multifaceted fighters. And they can whichever way they need to go in terms of what they need to do in the ring. You find that they can dig deep and dig into their bag of tricks and pull those tricks out. Elite fighters also, they usually can compete at several weight classes and win titles at multiple weight classes as well. And then the final level up from that is probably the most rarest that you'll see in boxing is the boxing prodigies. Now these types of fighters, they're once a generation type fighters. The Floyd Mayweathers, the Pernell Whitakers, those sorts of guys. Even you could even, I wouldn't want to say Lomachenko. In terms of, you can't really put Lomachenko in that category. I think he's an elite fighter. Can't say he's a boxing project. To some extent, you can say as an amateur he was. As an amateur, he's probably one of the best amateurs ever in the history of amateur boxing. But to put him as an elite, as a world boxing prodigy, as in the pro ranks, you can, but then you can't. I mean, his recent run of performances, they to me they don't scream, a boxing prodigy. But that's a topic for another video. So a boxing prodigy is a fighter that is not only blessed with God-given talents, but insane athletic ability and like insane ring IQ as well. These guys are born to box, and these guys you see once every 10 years or once every 20 years. You might see these guys are complete fighters. They have every tool in the bag. There's no weakness in their fight game at all. And you usually see things in the ring that they can't, what they do in the ring can't really be taught. I mean, they're taught, but what they're able to do and execute, when they're fighting other fighters, is stuff that you don't see. They have the ability to precept, anticipate opponent's movement and attack superbly. This is a level that's very rare that you see. You very rarely see a boxing prodigy in boxing, especially nowadays. I mean, boxing, skill sets have gone down in the sport. So to see these level of guys is very rare. Now, when we're talking about levels in boxing, it's also very important to keep in context. Different fighters can operate at different levels across different sort of. Okay, for example, I'll give you an example. Different fighters can operate at different levels. Yeah. So you could take, an elite level British fighter. For example, you could take a Joshua Buatsi. Joshua Buatsi, you could say he's number one in Britain. You could say that, as a at light heavyweight. So you could say, when we're talking at British level, he's an elite guy. But then you take him and you put him into the world stage, he's a prospect. Levels change depending on the context and the guys that you're facing. So it's very important to keep in mind when we're looking at resumes, and assessing resumes. You got to keep in mind, the context of where you're matching this guy up. Look at his resume. Look at the quality of guys that he's beaten. Look at how he's looked at those guys. Look when he's fought those guys. So it's very important to keep that in context. Yeah, so I mean that was the whole purpose of this video, is to talk about different levels in boxing. It's a very subjective thing when you're assessing fighters. That's why it's very hard to assess fighters very good. That's why it's a very tricky thing. But I just thought I'd put a video out on it just to get my thoughts out there. And again, this channel is going to be doing a lot of analysis on upcoming fights. So it's as the videos start getting pushed out on the channel, I think this video will become more relevant you know, the longer this channel runs in terms of, you know, putting out content and the consistency of it. So yeah, that was the point of this video. Hopefully you find it has some educational aspect of it. Hopefully helps you when you're, you know, watching your boxing and, you know, trying to understand and study fighters and things. If you like the video, drop a comment below. If you've got anything to add, drop a comment below. You know, I usually let me know what you think in the comments. If you like the video, thumbs up. If you don't like it, thumbs down. And yeah, if you like the content, you know, if you're interested in what this you know, the content, yeah, just subscribe to the channel and, you know, follow. So yeah, all right, it's Hypno, and I'm out of here.